Beneath a sky choked with ash and the ghosts of fallen banners, the battlefield lay silent yet heavy. The warrior stood alone amidst the ruins of an entire era. Once the singular enemy of all, he now walked among the fallen as the last witness to a war that had consumed legends. The banners of fallen clans lay tattered in the wind, their symbols broken like the world they once ruled. Yet his story did not end in silence. The truth behind his survival was revealed, not through mercy, but through mastery. This was the tale of the man who faced the world. From a distance, a lone man pulled a sword from a defeated warrior. Before him stood three martial masters unmoving: the Shaolin abbot Hian Jinqian, Manhwa sect leader Jianghu, and the head of the Namgung clan, Namgung Huang. Namgung Huang shouted, declaring that the man was definitely worn out and that they must kill him now. The lone man looked at them with a fierce tone and spoke, saying that now only they remained. Hian Jinqian stepped forward and spoke, uttering Amitabha and telling them to prepare themselves. In an instant, the lone man appeared right before Hian Jinqian's face without warning and attacked. Hian Jinqian barely dodged and immediately fell back. He spun his staff and shouted, calling the lone man demonic god and a fiend before performing a technique known as the Great Buddha Palm. A burst of chi fired toward the lone man. The lone man, known as the demonic god, braced himself for the attack, but just as it was about to strike, he leaped high into the air, dodging it completely. Mid-air, now directly above Hian Jinqian, he readied himself for a strike and descended with his sword, shouting that he would kill the Shaolin abbot first. Hian Jinqian blocked the blow with his staff, groaning from the impact so powerful it sent nearby rocks flying. As he struggled to hold the attack at bay, he cried out in desperation, asking the others what they were doing and insisting that now was the time. At his call, Jianghu and Namgung Huang rushed toward the demonic god and swiftly disrupted the assault on the Shaolin abbot. After passing through, both halted mid-air at a distance and performed their techniques simultaneously, Jianghu unleashing Plum Blossom Flash and Namgung Huang invoking 10,000 Thunders return as one, before shouting in unison for the demonic god to die. Their attack struck the demonic god's right shoulder. He screamed in pain as blood gushed from his mouth. From behind, Hian Jinqian spun his staff and launched another strike, shouting for the demonic god to be reborn in paradise. But the demonic god leaped upward again, dodging the blow. Hian Jinqian was shocked by his speed despite having just endured a combined assault from the Manhwa sect leader and the head of the Namgung clan. He gasped in disbelief. The demonic god spun midair and descended at insane speed toward Hian Jinqian. In an instant, the Shaolin abbot fell to the ground, decapitated. The demonic god stood holding Hian Jinqian's head, his spine pulled out from his body, and turned toward the remaining two with a grin, simply saying, "Next." Jianghu and Namgung Huang stood frozen in horror and disbelief, muttering that he was a monster. The demonic god then charged toward them. Namgung Huang instantly backed away while Jianghu remained rooted in place. Namgung Huang shouted for him to get back, but it was too late. Jianghu faced the attack and blocked it with his sword. The demonic god pushed through with a grin on his face. That lone man, known as Jiang Qian, had single-handedly drowned the Central Plains in blood. To slay him, the elites of all 9 great sects had gathered. Yet against the strength hailed as the greatest under heaven, the alliance had been driven to the brink of annihilation. As Jiang Qian and Jianghu clashed blades, Jiang Qian grinned and asked the old man if he had prepared the trap. Jianghu responded that it was ready. It was Jiang Qian's grave, and executed his technique, Endless Plum Blossom Rain. As the Plum Blossom attack surged toward him, Jiang Qian gripped his sword tightly and recalled a memory, thinking to himself that it was not yet time, that he could not die yet. Raising his sword, he performed the Namgung sword art, 5th form, Black Dragon Demon Slaying Slash. Intercepting the Plum Blossom assault, his strike continued forward and landed squarely on Jianghu, who screamed in agony as blood erupted from his body and mouth, dying instantly. To Jiang Qian's surprise, another attack struck him from behind. Namgung Huang had launched his technique, Sovereign Without Hindrance. The blow landed fast and true. Jiang Qian gritted his teeth in pain and thought to himself that Namgung, that rat bastard, had really hurt him. But then, recalling another memory, his grimace twisted into a wild smirk as he located Namgung Huang mid-attack and declared that it only tickled. Namgung Huang was stunned and cried out in disbelief. Jiang Qian raised his sword and delivered a powerful slash that severed Namgung Huang's left fingers, carved wounds across his body, and sliced his face horizontally. Namgung Huang leaped backward mid-air, screaming in pain, and clenched his teeth as he thought to himself that Jiang Qian, that filthy cultist of the demonic sect, would not escape so easily. He rolled through the air, kicked off nothingness, and with a flash of lightning, rushed toward Jiang Qian. Bouncing around in a blur of motion, He surrounded Jiang Qian with his lightning technique before halting directly behind him and driving his sword forward with a yell to die already. The strike pierced Jiang Qian's back. Namgung Huang declared that his stubborn life ended there. Jiang Qian clenched his jaw as another memory surged through his mind. He whispered that yes, it ended here. Namgung Huang, still pinning him with the embedded sword, stammered in confusion. Jiang Qian then screamed violently, blood spewing from his mouth as he roared that it ended, that this cursed fate ended now. He drove his own sword into his chest, the blade passing through his body and impaling Namgung Huang as well. Namgung Huang shrieked in pain. Jiang Qian yanked the sword free, spun around, gripped it with both hands, and swung it with such force that it severed Namgung Huang's head clean off. As his head flew away, Namgung Huang's final thought was one of utter disbelief. How could Jiang Qian still move after having his heart pierced? Had he truly surpassed human limits? Was this the demonic god? With that, Namgung Huang died. As the sun rose, the 9 great sects lay annihilated. In the center of the battlefield, only Jiang Qian remained standing. He lowered his sword and began murmuring names softly, Yamhua, Seok Ah, Young Ah, and asked if this had been enough. A flash of memory rushed through his mind, a group of children ganging up on a single boy, shouting at him for his arrogance. Suddenly, a grown man grabbed the feisty child from behind, lifting him as the boy flailed with kicks and punches. The man asked why the boy was striking him. Watching this memory, Jiang Qian wondered if this was his life flashing before his eyes. It had been so long since he had seen his master's young face. He reflected that his path in the martial world had begun there, with daily brawls just to survive, a wandering life with only a sword in hand and no place to settle. To live through each day, someone had to die. It was an endless cycle of meaningless killings. Could such a life hold any meaning? Was life truly this fleeting? His memories continued, pausing as the image of a woman appeared. She had once told him she understood that feeling, that she too clashed with people daily at the marketplace. In this world, if you did not see everyone as an enemy, you would not last long. Comforting her younger siblings whenever they craved special treats was no easy task either, yet those times were the most precious. When she had collapsed after losing her parents, they had given her a reason to live again. She had urged Jiang Qian to create such meaning for himself as well, calling him Great Hero Jiang Qian. Then the memory shifted abruptly. He saw himself crying out loud, sitting before the woman and her younger brother and sister, dead, with swords embedded in their bodies. He had wanted to live with her. She had become the reason for life to one who had known only killing. His sword had risen again for vengeance. His drifting life had no home. He had wondered where the purpose of his life truly lay. Snapping back to reality, he lowered his head after a few moments and began to cry, whispering that the purpose had already been there. The path of carnage he had walked alone for 15 years. Though his blade had grown dull and countless wounds had carved into his body, in the end, he had given everything to complete his vengeance. At last, gazing upon the rising sun, he laid down the sword in his hand. Here lay the demonic god, Jiang Qian. Everything went dark. Then suddenly, a loud voice echoed within. "What are you barging in here for? Do you think I'd sell my martial arts for a handful of coins?" Jiang Qian thought to himself that it was so noisy. He opened his eyes and added that he must have come to hell after all. Before him stood a woman and a young man, with martial warriors behind them. The woman spoke, saying that because the young man's brother had suffered an unfortunate accident and could not inherit the martial legacy, they now wanted her son to succeed the Namha family's secret martial arts. Jiang Qian was confused by the situation and wondered if this was not hell after all. His attention was caught when the boy beside him shouted that it was absolutely not acceptable. His elder brother was alive and well, so how could the family martial arts flow into the mother's line? The girl beside him added that the boy was not even blood-related from the mother's side in the first place. Even if the brother could not inherit the arts, their grandfather's legacy belonged to the Manhwa family. At that sight, Jiang Qian's eyes widened. The children resembled the younger siblings of the woman he had loved in the past. He thought to himself in disbelief, asking who they were. The young man in front then grinned and stepped forward, saying that this would not end easily and that he would make them a proposal. Jiang Qian turned toward the man and muttered in confusion, asking what proposal he meant. The young man extended his hand and declared that he had heard the 2 brats were so poor they could barely eat. He would wager money. Hua Mujin would wager his clan's entire martial legacy. They would fight, and the winner would take it all. He asked what they thought of that. The boy beside Jiang Qian stammered in shock, reminding them that his brother could not even begin training due to his madness. The girl added that they would not fall for such an obvious trick. Then suddenly, Jiang Qian spoke aloud, clicking his tongue and calling their chatter noisy. He turned and asked who the hell this Hua Mujin was anyway. Both children beside him fell silent at his statement. Jiang Qian then introduced himself, declaring, "I am the demonic god, Jiang Qian." The man standing in front of him asked in confusion, "What? Who did you say you are?" Jiangqian responded calmly and stated his name, explaining that people once called him the demonic god. The young man scoffed at the title, finding it dull and overused, and remarked that he might as well claim to be the king of the underworld. This arrogant youth was revealed to be Jiang Dobo, the second son of the Jianghua Merchant Guild. The boy standing beside Jiangqian muttered that of all times, it had to happen now, while the little girl at his side groaned in frustration. A woman then stepped forward and declared that his madness worsened by the day. She clicked her tongue while idly tapping her fan, and claimed that with such a family heir, the fate of the Yonghua clan was already sealed. She insisted she said this only out of blood ties, and advised they take it kindly. It was implied that her warning carried benefits for them as well. This woman was Bu Chuyan, the master of the Jianghua Merchant Guild. She smacked her fan against her palm and announced there was nothing more to discuss, stating that silence would be taken as agreement. Turning away, she declared that on the 5th day of the next month, the matter would be settled. Her son, Jiang Dobo, turned his head back toward Jiangqian and added smoothly, "We will meet at the Flying Shadow Pavilion, a promise made between martial artists. If you break it, you know what will happen, do you not, demonic god Jiangqian?" With that, they departed. The little girl beside him watched them go and complained that they had decided everything on their own. She asked in a trembling voice what he planned to do, insisting that he had never properly swung a sword. Jiangqian lowered his gaze to them and muttered in confusion, wondering aloud if he truly had never swung one. He attempted to circulate his qi, finding nothing, and laughed bitterly at the thought that he could still muster strength. A sudden realization cut his words short, and he froze. He shouted in disbelief when he found that not a shred of internal energy remained. He bent down in frustration and complained that the frail bones of this body felt like they could not even support a weapon. The sheer weakness of his current state left him appalled. Suddenly, the little girl screamed for him to stop. He paused and stared at her. Tears welled at her eyes as she begged him to regain his senses, insisting that even in madness, no one could remain calm after hearing such provocations unless they were a fool or an idiot. The boy beside her frowned sharply and reprimanded her, demanding she apologize immediately for insulting her elder brother. She shook her head and cried harder, refusing, and then she shouted that their parents were dead because of him. The words stunned Jiangqian. The girl fled, tearing herself away, while the boy remained. He explained tiredly that their brother might not remember, as incidents like this happened often. He asked for understanding. Jiangqian murmured in response, trying to comprehend, and the boy excused himself politely before departing as well. Left alone in the courtyard, Jiangqian stared blankly ahead. Even the children treated him as if he were insane. Nothing about the situation made sense. Wandering the estate in silence, he reviewed the events in his mind. He recalled beheading the Namgung clan head with certainty, and the moment his own heart had been pierced. The suffocating pain remained vivid in his memories. He remembered fulfilling vengeance for Yanhua and her siblings, and the peace he believed should have accompanied his final breath. Yet when he stumbled upon a mirror, he found a completely different face staring back. His knees weakened, and he clutched his head in agony. Nothing about this situation aligned with logic. If that was true, then who were those children who resembled Seok and Yang-ah? Madness was the label given to him now, but to him it sounded like nonsense. A man suddenly rushed toward him, shouting urgently for the young master. When Jiangqian stood, the man scolded him for wandering outside in such a frail condition, and insisted that he had been worried. Jiangqian questioned who he was, and noted that the man clearly knew him. Confusion clouded the man's face until understanding dawned. He grabbed Jiangqian's arm and sighed, realizing the madness had struck again. He offered to explain. He introduced himself as Masok, a retainer of the Yonghua clan, and stated that once, due to exceptional talent and wisdom, countless righteous sects had sought to recruit Jiangqian. At the age of 23, he had been known as Hua Mujin, the clan's heir. Masok sighed wearily and confessed that this explanation marked the 6,205th time he had repeated it. Jiangqian shoved Masok's hand away and feigned boredom. He commented sarcastically that if he had been so great, he wondered why his dantian had become like this. Madness had become the reputation attached to him, and everyone treated him accordingly. Masok hesitated before revealing that 17 years earlier, something had happened. His words transitioned into the memory of a duel between two children. It took place on an open field while the clan elders were away. Two young boys bowed to one another and declared a match without internal energy for fairness. The boys were 6-year-old Hua Mujin and 9-year-old Jiang Dobo. Hua Mujin had challenged Dobo sincerely. Dobo nodded and repeated the terms of fairness. They began to fight recklessly. Masok continued narrating that although unclear who first proposed it, the two young masters engaged in a duel unattended. Young Mujin dodged and muttered that Dobo deflected every blow, impressed by his speed. Dobo paused mid-fight and echoed the praise, remarking on Mujin's talents. Before Mujin could respond, Dobo used internal energy and slammed a strike straight into him with a wild grin, calling him a fool. The blow launched Mujin through the air. He crashed violently, blood spilling from his nose. Dazed, he asked why Dobo used internal energy despite their agreement, and why he knew the Seven Wounds fist. Dobo shrugged and explained smugly that assassinations and experimentation came naturally. He boasted that he had already tested the technique on another disciple, who now hovered near death. With calculated cruelty, he launched another strike. Masak finished recounting the event. Jianghu, now occupying Hua Mujin's body, concluded quietly that this must be why everyone treated him as a lunatic. The after effects of the Seven Wounds fist left long-lasting damage. He remembered what had happened earlier with Jiang Dobo, and found the scenario enraging. To cripple someone, turn them into a madman, and then shamelessly challenge them afterward was unforgivable. He asked Masak how the offender had been dealt with. Masak explained that Hua Mujin's father, the former clan head, oversaw the matter. Jiang Dobo, being both his nephew and heir of one of the 10 greatest merchant guilds in the Central Plains, escaped punishment with only a severe scolding. Jiang Qian smirked bitterly and muttered that such a pathetic family allowed such leniency. He asked about his parents. Masak lowered his head and led him to the ancestral hall. There, in front of the altar, he explained that Hua Mujin's madness worsened over time, forcing his father into debt to seek treatment. 9 years ago, his mother's illness worsened and she died. 3 years later, burdened by impossible debt and despair, his father passed as well. Masak recalled the night of the ancestral ceremony and the whispers that followed through the hall. The close aides of the clan had called him a child who devoured his parents, blamed him for torment, and predicted the clan's end. Masak continued, explaining that what remained of the clan were the debts, 2 loyal retainers, and barely a dozen warriors. Lastly, he mentioned the 2 younger siblings who survived, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyan. Jiang Qian remembered Soyan's earlier anger, and admitted internally that a family ruined by illness justified her emotional outburst. Later that night in Hua Mujin's room, he pored over books. From them, he learned that after the battle with the 9 great sects, demonic god Jiang Qian had indeed died, and 30 years had passed. The world felt too real for this to be a dream. He concluded he had taken over the body of the young Hua clan's heir. He studied hand-drawn pictures and letters left by his siblings wishing him recovery. Their kindness mirrored children he once knew. He quietly realized that he would need to live as Hua Mujin now, and that, perhaps, he should help the children who suffered unjustly. The greatest obstacle was the Jianghua Merchant Guild, the group responsible for crippling him and ruining the clan. He noted that the duel with Jiang Dobo was scheduled for the 5th day of the next month, and that before then he had to secure discipleship. He lamented that he would have to start martial cultivation from the very beginning. As he sat quietly, he remembered the first time he learned martial arts in his previous life. Even breathing had been difficult. Slowly, he began practicing a breathing technique, and found that this body did not require the usual process for sensing qi. Simply closing his eyes allowed energy to flow. Qi gathered rapidly at his dantian, becoming fierce and overwhelming. The room glowed brighter and brighter until a deafening boom echoed across the estate. Servants rushed into his chamber and found him unconscious on the floor. One of them shouted in panic and examined him, mistaken at first that he had died. Checking again, he found his pulse stronger than ever, and cursed under his breath that the young master had somehow become healthier. Suddenly, Hua Mujin's hand snapped upward and grabbed the man's finger. He groaned awake and muttered in irritation that merely forming a dantian caused unbearable pain. The man asked in confusion what he meant. Hua Mujin demanded to know what sort of body he possessed, and whether it was some form of special constitution. The man casually admitted he had heard it referred to as the Heavenly Martial Constitution by a wandering Shaolin elder. Jiang Qian paused internally. The Heavenly Martial Constitution. The man chuckled and said it was the body blessed by heaven to walk the righteous path. Anger flickered in Hua Mujin's voice, but before he could retort, he coughed blood violently. He realized instantly that his constitution was wholly incompatible with demonic cultivation. If one with this body cultivated demonic arts, the pain would be unbearable and death could follow. He recalled other rare physiques: heavenly killing, heavenly flame, heavenly longevity. Masak knelt beside him and fanned him desperately, begging him to stay conscious. Jiang Qian cursed inwardly, frustrated by fate itself. The duel was next month, and his condition was dire. Through clenched teeth, he asked aloud who the old men standing nearby were. Masak identified them as Chief Steward Do Baek Shin and Elder Zhou Huanbong. Jiang Qian narrowed his eyes at them, noting their cold expressions as they whispered privately that his condition worsened daily and that perhaps it was time to prepare their hearts. He reached toward Elder Joe with trembling fingers, thoughts burning with rage, but another surge of blood burst from his lips. Masak shouted his name fearfully and begged him not to die like this. Jiang Qian's thoughts roared defiantly in the silence that followed.
I will not die, damn it.
A few days later, at the Yomwa clan estate, heavy rain poured as Masak's voice echoed down the hall. He shouted that the young master had been lying unconscious for 3 whole days. Masak followed Hua Mujin as the latter walked toward the wall, still yelling in concern, asking if he was really all right. Hua Mujin continued walking and thought to himself that lying out cold for 3 full days was absurd. He cursed his damned body, fearing he would die before even reaching the duel. He paused briefly, his body and face wrapped tightly in bandages, and told Masak to quiet down, as his shouting was making him look bad. More importantly, he said, if he was going to duel, he would need a sword. As thunder crashed in the courtyard, Hua Mujin turned to Masak, pointed at him, and ordered him to go fetch a few swords right away. Masak responded hesitantly, reminding him that they were at a point where they should be worried about their next meal. Where would they even get the money to buy a sword? Hua Mujin, still pointing, demanded to know if there was truly no money left in the entire household. Masak explained that they were already borrowing from the loan syndicate, and because of the syndicate's outrageous interest rates, their debts had ballooned to enormous levels. Hua Mujin fell silent as another peal of thunder rolled overhead. He lifted his head and reflected inwardly that this was truly the state of a fallen family. It seemed they needed to solve their money problems first. Leaning closer to Masak, he placed his elbow on his shoulder and smirked, saying that if it was just more debt, what did it matter if they added a little more? Masak exclaimed in panic, asking if he was seriously planning to borrow again. Hua Mujin dismissed his complaints and instructed him to write a letter to the 2 elders, stating that he was going for a walk. Later, Elder Do Baekshun read the letter and reacted angrily, demanding whether young Master Hua had really gone to the loan syndicate again. Elder Zhou Huanbong, standing beside him, remarked that it shouldn't be a big deal. Surely the syndicate would just turn him away. Do Baekshun disagreed. The real problem, he said, was that if Hua Mujin carelessly provoked the loan syndicate, the minor lawless factions might get involved. Elsewhere, outside the loan syndicate building, Hua Mujin and Masak stood before the tall guard stationed at the entrance. Hua Mujin smirked and called out to the man, telling him to inform his leader that Hua Mujin of the Yomwa clan wished to see him. The guard, Kang Noho, looked down at them and replied dismissively that if they had come to gamble, they should play quietly and leave without making pointless noise. Hua Mujin looked up and retorted that if Kang Noho couldn't relay the message, he should call someone who could. Kang Noho raised his voice and called him a punk. Beside him, Masak nervously interjected multiple times, stammering that their young master was just a bit unwell, and begging the guard not to take offense. Hua Mujin, still glaring at Kang Noho, asked what he was looking at. Suddenly the sound of a tossed coin cut through the tension. In an instant, another man appeared between Hua Mujin and Kang Noho, and asked what was going on. Hua Mujin instinctively stepped back. Kang Noho addressed the newcomer as brother, and explained that this man wanted to meet the leader. Hua Mujin asked if the newcomer was the one in charge. The man flicked another coin with his fingers, and asked why Hua Mujin wanted to see the leader. Hua Mujin replied instantly that he wanted to borrow more money. The man caught the coin mid-air, looked directly at Hua Mujin, and declared, "So you're a customer." This man was Ma Zhengbo, the loan syndicate's deputy leader. He added that if that was the case, there was no need to see the leader at all, then opened the door and invited them inside. Later, they arrived in an underground chamber beneath the building, walking along a wooden hanging bridge inside a cavern. Masak, walking beside Hua Mujin, whispered urgently that they should turn back. He had a terrible feeling about this. Hua Mujin dismissed him, saying they had come all this way and questioning his sudden fear. As they entered a small opening in the cave, Masak whispered more desperately that a few days earlier, an old woman at the market tea house had told him she saw 2 loan syndicate assassins fighting a single man, and in the blink of an eye, the man's chest was sliced open. He added that those assassins were said to be incredibly skilled martial artists who had mastered the twin ruinous force, moon-slaying heaven technique. Hua Mujin turned his head and asked what that technique even was. Masak repeated the name in a hushed tone. Hua Mujin simply asked what he expected him to do about it. Their conversation was abruptly cut off by the sound of another coin toss echoing through the cave. Ahead of them, Ma Jungbo, who had been leading the way, laughed and remarked that the servant was quicker on the uptake, but it was already too late to turn back. In an instant, the syndicate members behind Hua Mujin and Masak drew their swords. Ma Jungbo caught the coin mid-air and gave a single command, "Begin." Hua Mujin asked if this had been Ma Jungbo's intention all along. Ma Jungbo turned his head with a grin and explained that one could not simply assassinate the eldest son of the Yomhwa clan in broad daylight at a crowded entrance. He accused Hua Mujin of shamelessness for not even being able to pay the principal, let alone interest, and declared he would not allow him to bleed the syndicate dry the way his parents had. Beside Hua Mujin, Masak collapsed to his knees, bowing repeatedly and begging them to spare the young master's life. Hua Mujin corrected Ma Jungbo coldly, saying he never had parents. For a moment, silence fell over the cavern. Hua Mujin then thought to himself that he had momentarily mistaken Ma Jungbo's words for something from his past life. A syndicate member behind them announced he would begin. Ma Jungbo gave permission, instructing them only to rough Hua Mujin up a little. The syndicate members shouted in unison and obeyed. Instantly, one of them grabbed Hua Mujin, lifted him high into the air, and began spinning him around while shouting that the arrogant brat would die. Mid-spin, Hua Mujin shifted his body, seized the man's arm, and snapped it with a sharp twist. The man screamed in agony as he crashed to the ground, shouting that the rat-like punk had surprisingly nimble footwork. After landing, Hua Mujin glanced at his attacker and remarked that for such a big man, he was surprisingly soft. He looked at his own hands and reflected that with his current rotten body, this indirect method worked better than a direct fight. Behind them, Ma Jungbo tossed another coin and impatiently asked what they were all doing, telling them to finish it quickly. Another syndicate member lunged forward with his sword, slashing repeatedly at Hua Mujin, who dodged each strike with swift precision. Frustrated, the attacker called him a slippery eel. Hua Mujin continued evading, and thought that since raw strength was out of the question, using movement arts was the optimal approach. At that moment, now, he charged straight forward and headbutted the man square in the face. Blood gushed from the man's nose as he stumbled backward. Before Hua Mujin could recover, another syndicate member was already beside him, swinging his blade. Hua Mujin flipped backward, landed on his hands, twisted his hips, and unleashed a spinning kick that sent the attacker flying. The man crashed into a third syndicate member behind him, and both tumbled to the ground in a heap. Nearby, Masak cried out, asking if the young master was all right. Hua Mujin landed smoothly and replied that he was perfectly fine. Couldn't Masak see that? Masak stared in disbelief and asked where he had learned such martial arts. Hua Mujin clarified that it wasn't martial arts. It was just what he had naturally picked up from living on the rough streets. Masak frowned in confusion and asked when the young master had ever lived on the streets. Their exchange was cut short once more as Ma Jungbo prepared to toss another coin. He acknowledged Hua Mujin's skill and challenged him to dodge this as well. He flicked the coin with tremendous force, aiming directly at Hua Mujin. Hua Mujin barely dodged it in time, though a few strands of his hair were sheared off. He thought in astonishment, was that really just a coin? He whirled around to face Ma Jungbo just as the deputy leader ordered the remaining syndicate members to leave, declaring he would handle things himself. Hua Mujin stated firmly that he only wanted to speak with their leader, and asked if that was truly so difficult. Ma Jungbo drew his sword and replied that the leader was not someone one could meet so casually, then ordered Hua Mujin to leave. In an instant, Ma Jungbo lunged forward with his blade. Hua Mujin, however, pulled out a pair of chopsticks and blocked the strike. Ma Jungbo exclaimed in shock, "Chopsticks?" Hua Mujin shoved the sword aside with the utensil, and thought to himself that he had brought them as a sword substitute, but they were proving surprisingly useful. He began parrying Ma Jungbo's sword strikes with the chopsticks, carefully observing the deputy leader's attack patterns. He recalled the rumors that Ma Jungbo used martial arts no one had ever heard of. Then he spotted an opening. An opening, he thought. In a flash, he stabbed Ma Jungbo's sword hand with a chopstick. Ma Jungbo groaned in pain as Hua Mujin yanked it free. Ma Jungbo reeled internally. This man had not only blocked a sword with chopsticks, but exploited the moment to strike back. Enraged, Ma Jungbo swung his blade horizontally and shouted, "You punk!" Hua Mujin leaned his head back just in time to evade the slash. Ma Jungbo clicked his tongue in frustration, muttering that Hua Mujin moved like a rat. Hua Mujin retorted that if Ma Jungbo underestimated chopsticks, he would soon be shitting blood. He began spinning multiple chopsticks in both hands, imbuing them with his own chi, and hurled them at Ma Zhengbo. Everyone struck true. Ma Zhengbo clenched his jaw and groaned in pain, thinking in disbelief. Hadn't they said Hua Mujin could no longer use internal energy? How had he reached such a level? He swung his sword wildly, but Hua Mujin dodged each strike with ease. Ma Zhengbo's mind raced. Was this truly the Hua Mujin of the Yomhua clan he thought he knew? Hua Mujin found another opening and stabbed Ma Zhengbo again with a chopstick. He spoke aloud, saying he had heard his family was drowning in debt, so he had come to see what kind of people they were dealing with. But to find them extorting with such pathetic skill was disappointing. He struck again, this time piercing Ma Zhengbo's elbow with another precise stab. After a few more exchanges, Ma Zhengbo leaped high into the air, declaring he would show Hua Mujin a taste of the martial arts he so clearly looked down upon. Hua Mujin called up from below, confused. When had he ever looked down on them? Ma Zhengbo screamed in fury as his sword became enveloped in swirling qi. He roared that he was done with games and unleashed his secret technique, Twin Ruinous Force, Moon-Slaying Heaven. He descended with his blade aimed straight at Hua Mujin. Below, Hua Mujin stood perfectly still, looked up, and said calmly, "The ones playing games are you guys." As Ma Zhengbo struck, Hua Mujin sidestepped effortlessly. Ma Zhengbo's mind reeled. Had he really dodged it? On the side, Hua Mujin clenched his fist and began launching rapid hand strikes. Ma Zhengbo muttered to himself in terror. What on earth was this man? Had he been hiding this level of prowess all along? Hua Mujin delivered a powerful punch straight into Ma Zhengbo's gut. Ma Zhengbo curled over in agony, blood spilling from his mouth as he gasped. You punk. How do you plan to handle the consequences later? Suddenly, the familiar sound of a coin toss echoed through the cave, followed immediately by Hua Mujin's voice. I didn't come here to listen to threats. You know, he said, saying what I want to hear will help you live longer. He caught the coin midair, turned to Ma Zhengbo with a chilling grin, and repeated his original request. I need to borrow some more money, okay? Later, on the upper floor of the Loan Syndicate building, Hua Mujin sat among the usurers, taking a hit from a wooden pipe filled with weed. He lifted his head and exhaled the smoke, thinking to himself that it had been so long since he had this much fun. Without warning, Masok, who sat beside him, snatched the wooden pipe from Hua Mujin's hand and smashed it onto the table, exclaiming that such a thing was bad for his body. Hua Mujin glanced at the scattered weed and remarked that it was such a waste. Sitting across from him, Ma Zhengbo spoke aloud while the other syndicate members, those who had just been beaten in the cave, knelt on the floor with their heads bowed. Ma Zhengbo stammered and asked what Hua Mujin was curious about. Hua Mujin began to speak, questioning why men like them, who hated losing even a single coin, would support a clan without any collateral. He suspected there was malicious intent behind their actions. Ma Zhengbo lowered his head and insisted that Hua Mujin had it wrong, asking what malicious intent could possibly exist. Hua Mujin raised an eyebrow and said he could hear the gears turning in Ma Zhengbo's head from across the room. He then picked up a cup containing dice and began shaking it. With a cold tone, he warned Ma Zhengbo to think carefully. After about 30 of those dice went down his throat, he would not be able to speak even if he wanted to. After a few moments of silence, Ma Zhengbo finally confessed that they had acted at the behest of the Jianghu Merchant Guild. Hua Mujin nodded and said he had suspected those rat bastards. He then demanded to know what kind of deal they had made. Ma Zhengbo hesitated, stammering for words. Hua Mujin leaned forward and then poured the dice onto the table. In a chilling voice, he reminded Ma Zhengbo that he was neither an enlightened Taoist nor a noble warrior. If he was going to be faithful to someone, it should be to his own subordinates. Even if his body was chopped to pieces and the building burned to the ground that very day, the Jianghu Merchant Guild would not even bat an eye. Ma Zhengbo closed his eyes, paused for a moment, and finally spoke. He revealed there had been a contract. The Jianghu Merchant Guild had instructed them to lend the Yonghua clan as much money as they wanted, at the highest possible interest rate. They were told to make the clan suffer as though they had fallen into the swamp of King Yama's debt. In return, once the Yonghua clan inevitably collapsed, the guild promised them a satisfying reward along with the clan's land. Hua Mujin, reading the contract in his hand, remarked dryly that so they had been holding the clan's land as collateral after all. He then asked how much 300 yang of gold, the amount he was borrowing that day, would become in a year. Ma Zhengbo replied that, according to the contract, it would amount to approximately 5,000 yang of gold. Hua Mujin chuckled and called them a bunch of clowns. He declared it was time to move on to something else, dropped the contract onto the table, and fixed his gaze on Ma Zhengbo as he asked where the minor lawless faction was. Ma Zhengbo explained that they were one of the members of the Four Heavens Alliance, a union of Sapa sects, and that the minor lawless faction had only recently joined the coalition. Hua Mujin mused aloud that the Four Heavens Alliance was truly a dirty bunch. Beside him, Masok leaned closer and whispered in his ear, asking when Hua Mujin had ever met them to be spouting such nonsense again. Hua Mujin dismissed the question, saying it was a pain to explain, but then grew impatient and wondered aloud why the man sent to fetch the money was taking so long. Ma Zhengbo nervously urged him to wait just a moment. At that instant, a man burst through the door carrying a small chest. He placed it on the table and shouted that he had brought 300 yang of gold. Hua Mujin's eyes brightened immediately. He opened the chest, inspected the gold, and declared with satisfaction that it was good. More than enough. He stood up with a smirk and announced it was time to go. Masok, still seated, looked up at him and asked if he was really borrowing it. Hua Mujin told him to just take it without another word. As they exited the building, the rain continued to pour heavily. Outside the loan syndicate, Hua Mujin turned to Ma Zhengbo and held up a single gold coin. He instructed him to make sure it was properly recorded in the ledger that day. Once his business with the Jianghu Merchant Guild, their big client, was finished, he would return to pay off every single debt in full. He also warned them to stop extorting money from common folk. If they crossed the line, they would be seriously fucked. With that, he crushed the gold coin in his fist. Ma Zhengbo responded nervously, saying he would keep that in mind. As they walked away, Ma Zhengbo sighed deeply and thought to himself that he would soon see who got screwed over first. That mad young master of the Yonghua clan. Sometime later, the rain subsided. Hua Mujin and Masok returned to the Yonghua clan estate. Outside the ancestral hall, they were greeted by the elders, including Do Bexin, who cried out in alarm upon seeing the blood on Hua Mujin's clothes. Hua Mujin instantly assured him it was not his blood. Do Bexin demanded to know what had happened at the loan syndicate. Hua Mujin replied casually that he had simply gone to borrow some money. He reminded them they had said their living situation was difficult, and that the warriors of the Yonghua clan needed to be fed well, otherwise the rest of their people might run away. Elder Bexin stammered, asking if he had stolen the money, since there was no way the loan syndicate would lend to them. Hua Mujin said he had explicitly told them to record it properly in their ledger before leaving. He then placed a hand on Elder Do Bexin's shoulder as he stepped forward, and told him to focus only on feeding and clothing his younger siblings. As he walked away, he added cheerfully, "Well then, keep up the hard work." Inside the ancestral hall, Masok, who had been carrying the heavy chest of gold, suddenly collapsed under its weight. Do Bexin turned to Zhou Wanbong beside him and murmured in disbelief, asking if such madness could truly exist in this world. Zhou Wanbong watched Hua Mujin walk away in the distance and only clicked his tongue in response. Sometime later, Hua Mujin lit the candles on the altars dedicated to his deceased parents. He paused and spoke aloud, admitting he had never known his parents and was unsure what to say. He assured them that the financial issues were now more or less resolved, so they need not worry. From now on, he would take good care of his siblings and the household members. He asked them to rest in peace. Unseen in the corner of the ancestral hall, his younger siblings, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyon, listened quietly as he spoke to the altar. He continued, saying that in a few days, he would duel a man named Chiang Dobo, with a clan's secret manual on the line. With a smirk, he added that they should not worry. He would snap those bastards' necks. Silence filled the ancestral hall. The night ended, and morning came. Later that morning, 3 clan warriors carried large wooden cases out from outside Hua Mujin's quarters. As they dropped the 3 heavy cases to the ground, one of them exclaimed in exhaustion, asking what Hua Mujin had made them do. Masok, standing nearby, thanked them for their work. One warrior stretched his aching back and complained that it was so heavy he thought his spine would break. Another added that at least they had finally moved everything, and suggested they go have a drink and rest. A few seconds later, Hua Mujin opened the door, his face lit with excitement, and yelled out, "You're here?" He immediately began inspecting the cases. Each was labeled by weight. The first weighed 30 kilograms, the second 48 kilograms, and the last 66 kilograms. After checking the packages, he declared with satisfaction that they were all there, just right. He knelt down and opened one of the cases. Inside lay a massive sword. Masok knelt beside him and asked what he intended to do with such weapons, noting how much the warriors had struggled to carry them. Hua Mujin reached for the sword and replied, "What else would you do with a sword?" He gripped the hilt firmly and added, "You swing it." He thought to himself that he would start with the lightest one, the 30-kilogram sword. But the moment he tried to lift it, the blade crashed back to the ground. Masok looked at him skeptically and asked if he really intended to swing something so heavy. Hua Mujin fell silent, still gripping the sword on the ground. He reflected inwardly that he had expected this. but he had not imagined he could not even lift the 30-kilogram blade. He cursed his rotten body. Taking a deep breath, he tried again, telling himself he could not give up like this. After a tremendous effort, he managed to raise the sword, though his entire body trembled violently from the strain. He muttered that he could somehow lift it with both hands. He turned his eyes toward Masak, and ordered him to stop staring and do as he had been told. A few moments later, he dropped the sword and began dragging it inside his quarters. He instructed Masak that from now on, his meals should include meat-side dishes. Masak remained silent, watching Wamujin struggle with the enormous weapon, and quietly muttered that he was worried. Inside the room, Wamujin tied the sword to his left hand with a strip of cloth. Lifting it high with both hands, he thought to himself that only half a month remained until the duel. His current body possessed a heavenly martial constitution, which was completely incompatible with the demonic arts his master had taught him. Therefore, his only remaining option was the sword style passed down from his master's close friend, the 9 swords of Dugu. In an instant, he swung the massive blade inside the room, then paused in a sword stance. Closing his eyes, he reaffirmed to himself that this was now the only way for him to survive. Elsewhere, at the Jianghu Merchant Guild, Jianghu played a hagum. Upon hearing a report, he remarked that it was impressive. Wamujin had wiped out the lone syndicate. The man before him bowed and confirmed that, according to the carrier pigeon, the syndicate would be unable to move for about half a month. Jianghu mused aloud that Wamujin did not even have a dantian, so how did he possess such power? He grinned widely and added with a chuckle that class was permanent. Then, for their great young master Wa, he should prepare a little gift. He snapped the string of his hagum with his bow, and thought to himself that he was truly looking forward to the day of the duel. He wanted to see Wamujin reveal all of his hidden facets. A few days passed as Wamujin continued training his martial arts in the courtyard. He leaped high into the air and landed firmly on both feet, then reflected inwardly that this was the heavenly martial body. If it was truly a body granted by the heavens, it should at least withstand this much. Later, inside a spare room, he had set up multiple wooden traps across the room for his practice. Before beginning again, he thought to himself that Masak had already prepared everything he had asked for. He declared mentally that it began now. He performed a martial art technique. Solitary 9 swords, first form, declaration form. As he moved, he recited to himself, "I carry my sword and step forward at any time. Not even Mount Tai dares block my path." He followed immediately with the next technique, Form 2, breaking form. Again, he affirmed inwardly, "No matter what weapon comes at me, I will shatter them all." After executing the movement, a sharp pain suddenly flared in his dantian. He groaned aloud and thought that he was already reaching his limits from just this much, but he had to endure. He kicked a ball that ricocheted violently through the room. With his eyes closed, he dodged its trajectory as it hurtled straight toward him, then executed another technique, Form 3, sky-cleaving form. He cleanly sliced the ball in half before it could strike him and declared, "Even if the enemy's energy shakes the heavens, it will split before this sword." He paused for a moment. Then a burst of pain made him cry out, "Ugh, my back!" After a few seconds, he pulled a rope that released a trap from the ceiling. Multiple bamboo poles fell directly before him. He assumed a stance, observed their descent, and performed the next technique, Form 4, void-cleaving form. He spoke inwardly, "No martial art can stand before this edge. All complicated techniques fall to natural counterplay. Thus, the simplest sword can divide them." He swung his sword with such force that the bamboo poles flew across the hall and slammed into the wall at insane speed. But when he glanced at the wall, he realized he had missed the rope he had been aiming for and muttered in frustration, "Ugh, I didn't land a single hit?" As the remaining bamboo struck the wall, it accidentally hit the rope, severing it and triggering another trap. Heavy wooden logs began plummeting from the ceiling toward him. At the sight, he instantly assumed a stance and unleashed the next technique, Form 5, army slaughtering form. He thought to himself, "Even if a horde of enemies swarms me, they will kneel before this sword. An ant swarm can never surpass an elephant. Before true strength, numbers mean nothing." He sliced the falling logs into numerous pieces before they could land. As he caught his breath, a single fragment he had missed struck him squarely on the head. He clenched his teeth and shouted, "This is such bullshit! Next!" He then approached a cluster of bamboo poles with candles burning inside them, positioned in the corner, and began his next technique, Form 6, 1/part still water. He swung his sword violently and declared, "Even a floating leaf on water will be split in two by this blade." After finishing the technique, he looked around and muttered in disbelief, "This is all that's deactivated? Next is outside." He went outside and approached a stone statue, then performed his next technique, Form 7, 1 twin earths. He said to himself, "The sword opens the earth beneath. If it can cut the ground, then size no longer matters." After completing the movement, he noticed the statue remained completely unscathed and asked aloud, "Why is he still fine?" Sometime later, he performed the follow-up technique, Form 8, Heaven Sundering Form. He proclaimed inwardly, "Even the sky will be split by this blade. Is there anything left in the world I cannot cleave?" Immediately after finishing that form, he flowed seamlessly into the final one, Form 9, Self-Cleaving Form. He declared, "At last, I have cut both myself and my sword. I have no more reason to wield a sword." Once the technique concluded, he dropped his weapon and collapsed onto the ground. Closing his eyes, he murmured, "So in the end, it's just mimicry, huh?" Suddenly, a flash of memory surged through his mind, a conversation with his old master from his past life. In the memory, his master performed the final form of the technique and asked, "This is the final form, self-cleaving form. Did you memorize it?" Jianghu, still a child, sat on the ground looking up at his master and replied that he had memorized it, but questioned whether such an unworthy sword style deserved to be called a true sword art. He mocked the explanations as unbearably cringy, saying that cutting the earth, the sky, one's own sword, and even oneself sounded like something a child made up to seem cool. His master scoffed, lowered his head, and placed his left hand over his face. He admitted he wouldn't deny that, but asked whether his close friend's sword legacy should really end like this. He explained that he himself could not carry it on, so he wanted Jianghu to take it up instead. He added that his friend had been the only swordsman who could stand toe-to-toe with him. Jianghu, surprised, asked if that was possible without inner power. His master replied that his friend had likely used moving internal skill. He had strictly insisted the art be passed only to someone outside any established sect, because those within sects could never fully learn it. Jianghu chuckled and called moving internal skill a trash-tier method. His master flicked him hard on the forehead for disrespecting his friend and shouted, "I said that's how it is, so shut up already." Jianghu responded with a sigh. Fine, okay." His master continued explaining, "If one swung this sword style 1,000 times, the body would begin to change. At 100,000 swings, one would begin to emit a sword aura. And at 1,000,000 swings, few would match them under heaven." That was what his friend had claimed. Jianghu calculated aloud that even if one practiced 1,000 times a day, full mastery would take about 3 years, and asked if his master's friend had truly been as strong as him. His master replied that he couldn't be certain, but if they had fought to the end, one of them would definitely have died. Jianghu leaned back on the ground, gazing up at the night sky, and mused that he was now curious what kind of man that swordsman had been. The memory cut off abruptly when Masok found Mujin lying on the ground fast asleep. He slapped Mujin repeatedly across the face to wake him and shouted, calling him young master. After several slaps, Mujin finally woke with a startled plea to wait. Masok stopped and asked, worried, whether he was all right, saying he had been worried because the young master had not gotten up. Mujin, still lying on the ground, warned him that if he hit him once more, he would kill him. As Mujin sat up, he reflected irritably to himself that he had fainted after just one sword form, and that he was far from accomplishing 1,000 swings a day. He accepted that the road ahead was still long. Masok placed a tray of food before him and urged him to eat even though it was late. Mujin pointed at the dish and asked if it was pork. Masok replied that the young master had asked yesterday for meat-side dishes, and that it had been so long since they had enjoyed meat that they should savor it. Mujin said that starting tomorrow, he wanted beef because beef builds muscle better. If money were an issue, he told Masok to use the funds from the loan syndicate, and to tell the butler not to worry because he would borrow more later. He added that until he fought Cheongdobo, he would be eating 3 meat meals a day. While Mujin ate, Masok said he was amazed that the young master had suddenly mastered sword techniques, even though he had not known any martial arts before. He mentioned how Mujin used a chopstick to beat up the guards of the loan syndicate, and now this crazy sword style. Mujin said that he had already told the children, so telling Masok did not matter. He began to say he was not really the eldest son, Hua Mujin, and that his real identity was the divine demon, but Masok interrupted him sharply. He warned that if Mujin began spouting nonsense again, he would leave. He admitted that he only worried about one thing, that someday, just like before, Mujin would lose his memory again, change into someone else, and disappear without a word. He asked if the young master was thinking of abandoning the Yomhua clan. After finishing his food, Mujin set down his chopsticks and answered that he would never abandon the clan, not until Yomhua became the strongest martial family in Sichuan. Besides that goal, he did not really have anything else to do. Masok was taken aback and repeated the strongest martial family in Sichuan with disbelief. Mujin confirmed it with confidence. Masok scoffed at the ridiculousness of it. Without warning, Mujin flicked his forehead, then crossed his arms while sitting on the ground and told him that if he was done yapping, then he should get out. Masok grumbled and stood, saying fine as he left the room. Mujin closed his eyes and wondered to himself if becoming the strongest in Sichuan would be enough motivation for Hua Mujin as well. Time passed. Inside one of the rooms of the Yomhua clan estate, The two elders were present. Du Beiaxin poured tea into a cup, while Zhou Huanbong stood by the window, gazing outside as he spoke. In 10 days, it'll be the duel between Cheong Dobo and young Master Hua, Zhou Huanbong said. Du Beiaxin, seated at the table, responded by murmuring Cheong Dobo's name. He lifted the teacup and added gravely that the man would surely try to end the young master's life, and after that, he would come for the young emperor's inheritance. Zhou Huanbong then exclaimed, "What if we just run away before that happens?" Du Beiaxin instantly turned his head toward him and asked sharply, "What are you saying?" Zhou Huanbong pressed on, "Think carefully. We can't let the last two remaining be harmed as well." A few days passed as Mujin continued his relentless training. After one exhausting session, he gasped for breath and cursed in frustration. He looked down at his arm while panting and thought to himself that simply swinging a sword every day had begun to build actual muscle. He noted with satisfaction that he had finally reached the point where he could swing a 66-kilogram iron sword with one hand. Clicking his tongue, he muttered that there was only 1 week left until the martial arts competition. A familiar voice echoed in the distance, calling out to him. When he turned toward the sound, he saw his younger siblings, Hua Dojin and Hua Soyan, standing by the door. He approached them and asked what brought them there, then warned that it was dangerous, telling them to go play somewhere else. Dojin admitted that they were worried and explained that they had been watching him for days. They thought he was pushing himself too hard. Soyan added nervously that she wondered if he was doing all of this because of what they had said before. She confessed she had only been angry and had not meant it. Mujin sighed heavily at their concern. He looked at them and thought silently that the two of them reminded him of his former comrades. Then he lightly patted both of their heads and told them not to worry about him. Suddenly, Dojin began to imitate one of Mujin's sword postures with his arm and claimed excitedly that the posture had been amazing. He asked if that was how it was done and declared that Mujin looked just like a martial artist of the Jianghu. Soyan disagreed, arguing that the arms had been straighter than that. While watching them, Mujin smiled and thought it was cute that they were copying him. It reminded him of the days when he trained alongside his master. That nostalgic memory surfaced vividly. He remembered young Jiang Qian being lectured by his master, who instructed him to exhale when swinging the sword for as long as possible. The voice warned him not to rush. When returning to the original position, he was to inhale slowly and shortly. The master demanded that he understand clearly. When the memory faded, Mujin realized what he had almost forgotten. He thought to himself that the most important aspect of the Peerless Nine Swords was the breathing technique. He had neglected the lesson his master taught him. With a confident smile directed at his siblings, he told them out loud not to worry. He declared that he would win no matter what. Then he pushed both of them gently out of the training area and told them to go back to their rooms. As the door closed, the siblings laughed together. Soyan asked if everything would be fine, and Dojin answered with uncertainty that it probably would. Time passed as heavy rain poured down over the Yomhua clan estate. Mujin continued his training indoors. He performed another technique while thinking through the instructions in detail. He reminded himself to exhale while swinging, to hold it, to avoid rushing, and to inhale slowly and shortly when returning to position. He noted that the fifth form, Army Slayer, required using all collected internal energy at once. He finished the technique cleanly, grinned, and declared triumphantly that he had done it. Instantly, he shifted stance and performed the next sequence, breathing deeply. He reflected on movement arts, calling them a chi art that built internal energy through physical motion rather than meditation. Because movement arts required movement instead of stillness, they were looked down upon as low-grade martial arts with low expectations. The most important principle of movement arts, he reminded himself, was stable breathing. One must breathe with the flow of the sword to stabilize the body. He thought back to how difficult it once was to swing. But through training like this, the breathing stabilized everything. He reflected that after repeating this training continuously, even the dantian that had been in disarray for years was slowly beginning to come together. Eventually, the sun began to set. In the kitchen, Masak prepared food for Mujin. A voice called from behind him, revealing Zhou Huanbong. He asked if young Master Hua was still training. Masak hurried to finish preparing the meal, covered it, and said that the young master had become a completely different person. He explained that before, Mujin used to fall over constantly, but now he did not. Masak suspected that the treatment given by the Wudang physician might have been effective. Zhou Huanbong paused and placed his hand on his forehead while thinking quietly to himself. He doubted that even a Wudang physician could improve someone so dramatically with a single session. He then spoke aloud, instructing Masak to report to him if any problem arose, but before he could finish his sentence, Masak ran off excitedly with the covered meal and shouted his acknowledgement. Zhou Huanbong simply clicked his tongue at the situation. Moments later, Masak rushed toward the training yard and called out that dinner was ready. However, when he arrived and saw the scene before him, he froze in shock. The outer wall had been crushed into rubble. He stuttered in disbelief as he asked what he was looking at. Mujin replied calmly that the area was too small. When Masak asked what he meant, Mujin exhaled heavily, sweat pouring down his face, and clarified that the place was too small for training. He declared that from that point on he would use the official training hall instead. The next day, Mujin, accompanied by Masak, arrived at the Yeomhwa clan's training hall. Other warriors were already present and glared at him with disgust. Mujin noticed the stares and said out loud, "There are already people here." Masak tried to address the warriors, saying, Misters, the young master wishes to use the great training hall." He stopped speaking as the warriors' gazes turned toward him. Mujin stabbed his large sword into the ground and gestured for them to leave, saying, "You heard him, yeah? I'm gonna need to borrow the training hall. I want to train on my own. I need space. There is another one over there, so use that one." The warriors gritted their teeth, thinking, what the hell is this walking dead man saying? Just because you have a sword doesn't mean that you're a martial artist. He's never even shed blood with that sword of his. Mujin scoffed at them and said, "Goodness, your eyes are very challenging." One of the warriors began to respond, "Even if you're the young master." But his words were cut off as a man stepped in and extended his left hand sideways. The speaking warrior instantly noticed the man and said, "Sir." The man raised his hand and commanded, "Let's leave. The young master wishes to train martial arts." The man was Chil Boyin, the Yeomhwa clan Rain Sword Squad leader. As the warriors left, one of them clicked his tongue loudly and whispered as he passed Mujin, "Shh, it seems like he's lost his mind again." Mujin exhaled deeply and spoke before they could fully depart. "Hey, slowpoke, stop right there." Chil Boyin gritted his teeth at Mujin's taunt and turned his head, saying, "Ha?" Mujin lifted his head, turned toward them, and with a grin, said, "If you have complaints, say them to my face. Talking shit behind someone's back is a very pussy thing to do." Chil Boyin replied, "So what?" Mujin then challenged him, "What do you think? We're swordsmen." Mujin pointed his large sword straight at Chil Boyin's face and declared, "Let's fight." Chil Boyin scoffed and responded with a smirk, "Young Master Hua, even if the world is ending, there is no one who would unsheath their sword to fight someone who will eventually be the patriarch." Mujin then countered, "You know what people say. A dog that bites does not bark, whereas a dog that barks is afraid." He placed his large sword on his shoulder, grinned widely, and added, "If you're not gonna man up, then don't bark from the start. Just live like the cowardly dog you are." At Mujin's insult, Chil Boyin's body began to tremble with anger. He clenched his sword, unsheathed it, and began swinging it around before pointing it at Mujin, saying, "Don't regret it." Mujin took a sword stance with his large sword and smirked. "Well, I'm not one to regret things in life." Masak and the nearby warriors tensed as they watched the impending duel. Both combatants assumed their stances as silence filled the training yard. When Chil Boyin dropped his sheath, he instantly attacked. Mujin planted his large sword into the ground and jumped high to dodge the strike. As he leaped into the air, he appeared above Chil Boyin and grabbed his head from above. The warriors nearby were shocked by Mujin's actions, thinking to themselves that he was fighting a duel without his sword and wondering what kind of move this was. Chil Boyin immediately shifted his sword upward toward Mujin. Mujin twisted his body sideways to evade the attack. On the sidelines, Masak closed his eyes in terror and shouted, "Young Master Hua!" The battle continued with Chil Boyin relentlessly attacking Mujin from below, while Mujin kept dodging. Chil Boyin screamed in frustration, demanding that Mujin stop evading his attacks and fight him properly with a sword like a man. Still suspended midair, Mujin responded flatly, "You're right." He descended beside his giant sword and grasped its hilt. At the front, Chil Boyin began spinning his sword with his right hand and declared that it had been 25 years since he joined the Yeomhwa clan. He blamed Mujin for the clan's current state and mocked his sudden desire to learn martial arts. Gritting his teeth, Chil Boyin lunged forward with all his might, shouting that Mujin should know his place. Mujin prepared for the incoming assault, swinging his large sword. As Chil Boyin's attack neared, Mujin sharpened his gaze and executed his technique. "Solitary 9 swords, second form, breaking form," he announced. When their weapons clashed, Chil Boyin flew backward from the force of Mujin's strike. His eyes widened in shock as he thought to himself that even his internal energy was shaken by this technique. Mujin instantly followed up his attack, clenching his fist as he declared that everything Chil Boyin had said was true. But, he added, things would be different from now on. He punched Chil Boyin directly in the face, causing blood to gush from his nose and mouth. As Chil Boyin flew backward from the impact, he thought in disbelief about how Mujin's once clouded gaze had completely transformed. Those were now the eyes of a true warrior, burning with resolve. Chil Boyin crashed to the ground with a loud thud that echoed throughout the training yard. Everyone present, the warriors and Masak alike, stood completely shocked, thinking to themselves that young Master Hua had actually won. After a few moments, the warriors rushed toward the fallen Shielboin, shouting, "Brother, are you all right? Brother, brother!" Mujin planted his sword firmly in the ground and exclaimed, "Now, nobody has any complaints, right?" One warrior shouted toward Mujin, calling him a coward. When Mujin turned his head to ask how so, the warrior began to explain that Mujin had known Shielboin could not face him with his true strength. His words were cut off as Shielboin sat up and shouted for silence. Blood poured down from his nose and mouth as he admitted defeat. He stood and bowed respectfully, saying he had learned from this experience. Mujin simply responded, "Good, now step down." Shielboin shouted, "Loyalty!" and waved his hand toward the warriors, ordering everyone to stop interfering and move to the training ground next door. As Mujin watched them leave, he instructed Masak to go as well. As the warriors walked toward the adjacent training ground, one complained that even if Mujin was the young master, this was going too far. He asked why Shielboin had held back. Shielboin, walking in front, responded that he had not been holding back, he had intended to half-kill Mujin. The warrior behind him expressed disbelief, to which Shielboin retorted that he did not look like someone who spoke empty words. When the warrior stammered a hesitant reply, Shielboin concluded that regardless of what had happened, it seemed their mad young master had gained a heavenly opportunity. Masak, listening from the rear of the group, thought to himself about this heavenly opportunity. He wondered when Mujin would have had such a chance. He stopped walking, looked up at the sky, and added to himself that since the young master had changed, he supposed it was fine. As time passed, it was now the night before the duel with the Jianghu clan. Inside the ancestral hall, Elder Zhou Huanbong stood by the door staring at the night sky, while Du Beixin paid his respects at the altar. Du Beixin mentioned tomorrow's duel with the Jianghu Merchant Guild, and asked how many years it had been since they joined the clan. Zhou Huanbong, still gazing at the sky, responded that it had been about 37 years. Du Beixin remarked that it was quite a long time. He recalled the early days of the Yonghua clan, when Lord Yumjie in his youth had been truly unmatched. Even the haughty Tang clan had been forced to acknowledge his martial prowess. Du Beixin reminded Zhou Huanbong that they had both sworn to devote their lives, drawn by Lord Yumjie's radiance. Zhou Huanbong countered that Du Beixin was now breaking that vow. Du Beixin insisted this was not betrayal, they must carry on Lord Yumjie's bloodline and martial legacy somehow. Zhou Huanbong turned around and approached Du Beixin at the altar, saying he knew and that Du Beixin did not need to convince him. He noted they had spent 17 years tending to young Master Hua's madness, and 17 years protecting the withering Yonghua clan alongside him. Even if they met Lord Yumjie in the afterlife, he would not blame them. More importantly, Zhou Huanbong asked if the preparations were complete. Du Beixin sighed deeply and replied there was not much to prepare, just a little silver to secure a new place to settle. Beyond that, only a handful of warriors and 4 clan tokens remained. After a pause, he instructed Zhou Huanbong to go first. When Zhou Huanbong questioned this, Du Beixin explained that despite everything, Mujin was still of Lord Yumjie's bloodline. Someone must be there to tend to his body. He added that a martial master of the Kongdong sect, hired by the Jianghu Merchant Guild, would serve as witness to tomorrow's duel. Zhou Huanbong scoffed that they bragged about the witness as if theft was something to show off. Du Beixin explained that this demonstrated how serious they were. They meant to make it official. He cursed the Jianghu Merchant Guild as evil bastards who would burn the place until not even roots remained. He instructed Zhou Huanbong to go to the promised location first and wait for him, adding that the 2 young ones would be very shocked by all this. The next morning, as Mujin ate breakfast, he commented that lately the meat felt tougher and asked if it was just him. Masak, drinking tea across from him, replied that it was not just Mujin. The cheaper cuts from cattle were always the toughest. Mujin flicked Masak's forehead and asked if he was already out of money. Masak responded while drinking tea that he would not know since the chief steward barely gave them any. When Mujin asked if Masak was sulking, he denied sulking over something so petty. Mujin questioned why Masak had said something that would earn him a beating. After finishing his meal, Mujin dropped his chopsticks on the table, stood up, adjusted his clothes, and asked Masak how he looked today. Masak stared at him blankly and honestly replied that he had looked better with the bandages on. Mujin flicked his forehead again, turned around, and said, "Let's go." Masak obediently followed with a quiet affirmation. Mujin grabbed his giant sword as they exited the room. Outside the courtyard, Elder Du Baixin appeared and asked if Mujin was really going. Mujin narrowed his eyes and responded that he hoped Du Baixin had not come to spout the same nonsense about running away. Du Baixin assured him that was not the case. Mujin asked if that was right, then told Du Baixin to wait there. He would return after beating those thieves to a pulp. Du Baixin lowered his head in a bow and declared he was coming with Mujin. Mujin stared at him in silence, then closed his eyes and thought to himself that this old man worried too much. He was the one who would smash them anyway. Perhaps old folks simply worried more. After a few moments, Mujin opened the main gate, inhaled and exhaled deeply, and began walking forward saying, "Let's go." Later at the Jianghu clan estate, the town bustled with excitement over the impending duel. A man shouted through the crowded streets, announcing a duel between the Jianghu merchant group and the Jianghu clan, urging those wishing to place bets to hurry. The crowd began chattering amongst themselves, inquiring about the odds. The bookmaker consulted his ledger and declared the odds at best 1-4. After careful consideration, a bettor deemed this a reasonable payout. He added that any martial artist would be unwise to bet on a merchant group over a martial clan. He then wagered 2 silver nyang on the Jianghu clan. Suddenly, a man beside the bettor pointed into the distance and shouted, "Oh, it is the young master of the Jianghu clan." As Mujin arrived at the Jianghu clan estate, all eyes turned toward him. Unfazed by the stares, Mujin continued eating bing tang hulu. Witnessing this, the man who had just bet on the Jianghu clan abruptly requested to cancel his 2 nyang wager. Mujin took another bite of the sweet treat and spoke to Elder Do Baixin beside him, stating, "See, I told you I would not be late." Elder Do Baixin replied that eating so much before a duel seemed excessive. A woman approached them at the entrance, holding an open umbrella. She greeted Mujin, remarking it had been a while. This woman was none other than Bu Choyan. Out of consideration for their blood ties, she asked once more whether he truly intended to proceed with the duel. Nearby onlookers began whispering amongst themselves, expressing disbelief that the Jianghu side had requested the duel first. They muttered that the Jianghu clan, lacking proper talent, had recklessly initiated this challenge, and judging by the severity of Mujin's madness, the rumors appeared true. Mujin finished the last piece of bing tang hulu and thought to himself that they were making it sound as though his clan had demanded the duel. He resolved to repay them for that. He pointed the stick from the treat directly at Bu Choyan and responded firmly with a grin, stating they could not allow the Jianghu merchant group to seize the secret manual of the Jianghu clan, leaving them no choice but to fight. The crowd gasped upon hearing this, murmuring in confusion about whether a renowned house like Jianghu would covet a martial clan's secret art. Bu Choyan narrowed her eyes and replied that she wondered how long he would maintain such composure. Later, at the arena, the duel prepared to commence. A loud voice echoed throughout the space, announcing that Han Yigang of the Kongdong sect would serve as witness. Han Yigang then introduced the combatants: Jianghu Bo, the next successor of the Jianghu merchant group, and Hua Mujin, the young master of the Jianghu clan. He declared that under the Kongdong sect's authority, they must fight fairly. The crowd erupted in cheers. On the stage, Jianghu Bo spread his arms toward Mujin and smirked, remarking that he saw Mujin had received the goods sent from their merchant group. When Mujin appeared confused, Jianghu Bo clarified that the martial uniform Mujin wore was the Jianghu clan's attire, personally sent by him to commemorate the great Hua Mujin's return. Mujin drew his giant sword from his back, lifted it high as the bindings fell away, and rested the shaft on his shoulder. He smirked and replied that once the duel concluded, all remaining goods would need to be returned as well. The crowd murmured upon seeing Mujin's weapon, with one spectator questioning whether the Jianghu clan truly fought with a sword. Another wondered if swordsmanship could even be performed with such a massive blade. A third pointed out that the Flame Emperor had been known for bare-handed martial arts. From the top viewing area, Elder Do Baixin turned to Masak and inquired whether the young master had said anything unusual that day. Masak hesitated before admitting that when he had jokingly suggested fleeing that morning, Mujin had flared up in anger. Elder Do Baixin sighed, remarking that Masak had also suggested fleeing to him. Masak clenched his fist, insisting he personally believed without doubt that their young master would win, though he then doubted himself, wondering if running might have been better. He added that perhaps things would turn out differently since the young master had changed, though he questioned whether such a transformation could occur so suddenly. Elder Do Baixin closed his eyes, worrying silently whether the young master's madness had spread to Masak as well. The official handling the gong then bellowed for both sides to confirm their readiness. Hua Mujin and Jianghu Bo assumed their fighting stances. The official declared that if they were prepared, the duel would begin. He struck the gong with his mallet, its resonant rings signaling the start. Instantly, Mujin lunged forward and slashed with his giant sword. Jianghu observed the attack and blocked it with his own blade. The crowd's jaws dropped at the initial exchange, murmuring in disbelief that the young master Hua, who was said to be severely afflicted by madness and untrained in martial arts, exhibited such strength. On stage, Jianghu gritted his teeth, clicked his tongue, and shouted that even so, such skill belonged only to a mere pup. He surged forward, swinging his sword, while Mujin countered with his massive weapon. A fierce battle ensued as both combatants repeatedly swung their blades at each other, the clashing steel echoing throughout the arena. After a violent exchange, Jianghu managed to graze Mujin's face with his sword. Blood dripped down Mujin's cheek as he leaned back to evade the strike. He began moving around the stage, but Jianghu pursued relentlessly. Their swords met again with a loud clang. Jianghu grinned inches from Mujin's face as they locked blades, continuing their rapid exchange of attacks. From the top viewing area, Bu Choyan watched the fight intently. She thought to herself that this was surprising. Hua Mujin was lasting far longer than she had anticipated. Still, compared to the martial arts Jianghu had trained in until now, his skill remained insignificant. On stage, Mujin swung his giant sword and nearly struck Jianghu. Mujin switched his grip to follow up instantly, but Jianghu leaped high to dodge. Mujin looked up just in time to dodge as Jianghu descended with insane speed to attack. Once separated, they stared at each other. Jianghu thought that this time he would leave Hua Mujin crippled. He raised his sword, aiming it at Mujin, and declared that breaking a man's will was what he did best. He rushed forward immediately. Mujin blocked the attack, and Jianghu followed with another slash. Mujin bent backward to evade. Meanwhile, from the top viewing area, Elder Do Baixin and Masak could scarcely believe what they witnessed. Elder Do Baixin cleared his throat and remarked that he had expected young Master Hua to be defeated immediately, yet he was holding out quite well. Masak exclaimed that though he did not know the details, perhaps Mujin had not yet revealed his full strength. Elder Do Baixin turned to him, asking what he meant suddenly. Masak explained that he had secretly watched Mujin train in solitude, suggesting something enormous and even more powerful might soon be revealed. On stage, the fierce exchange halted once more as the combatants separated. Mujin, breathing heavily and drenched in sweat, thought to himself that from what he could tell, his current skills were about on par with his opponents. He wondered if the short amount of time he had trained had been insufficient. He concluded it did not matter, for throughout his past, no matter how strong his opponents had been, he had always killed them in the end. He resolved to kill this bastard without fail. He lifted his giant sword high as a burst of red chi flared around the blade. Jianghu likewise raised his sword, blue chi erupting along its length. They stared violently at each other. After a tense pause, both rushed forward simultaneously. Elsewhere, Elder Zhou Huangbong studied the instructions Elder Do had given him. The directions read, "From the place with a shabby hut, head east for 5 kilometers, then turn toward the side upon encountering a hawthorn tree, and proceed another 3 kilometers. As a gust of wind passed by, Elder Zhou sighed deeply upon arriving at his final destination. He remarked that he had somehow finally arrived, and fortunately, the two children had fallen asleep, making it easy to bring them along. He recalled an earlier conversation at dawn. Before leaving the Yomhua clan estate, he had asked Elder Do if he truly would not accompany him. Elder Do had responded that since Hua Mujin was still that person's blood relative, someone must at least gather his remains. He stated that he would personally oversee the young Master Hua's last journey. Elder Zhou had then turned away and replied that they would go ahead first and meet at the promised location. Returning to the present moment, Elder Zhou sighed again deeply as he looked up at the sky. He admitted to himself that he was not sure if what they were doing was the right thing. Back at the Chonghua clan estate, the fierce battle between Mujin and Chengdobo continued. As their blades clashed, Mujin thought to himself that Chengdobo was not bad for his age, but in the end, he was still just at the level of a greenhorn. The crowd watched the battle in awe, murmuring amongst themselves about why the two combatants appeared evenly matched, or why young Master Hua even seemed to have the upper hand. They recalled hearing that the second son of the Chonghua Merchant Guild was an outer sect disciple of the Kongdong sect, but he did not seem particularly impressive after all. Hearing the chatter from the crowd, Chengdobo gritted his teeth and shouted in fury as he swung his sword with powerful force toward Mujin. From the top viewing area, Elder Do and Masak gasped at the incoming attack, shouting warnings for young Master Hua to dodge. On the other side, Bu Choyan simply grinned at the sight. Mujin then began to perform a technique. Solitary 9 swords, first form, total annihilation form, he declared. As he struck, Chengdobo managed to block the attack. The crowd was shocked, exclaiming that it had been blocked. Mujin smirked as their swords clashed. Chengdobo groaned as he slowly realized Mujin was overpowering him. After a few moments, Mujin finally shoved Chengdobo away. Chengdobo slid backward as they stared at each other. Mujin grinned while Chengdobo clenched his jaw and shouted, mad bastard." Chengdobo then assumed another stance, as chi surged around him. From the top viewing area, Elder Do observed the fight, and thought to himself that young Master Cheng was gathering all his inner energy. The same thought occurred to Han Yigang and Bu Choyan, who believed this must surely be his final strike. As Chung Dobo gathered his inner energy, Mujin suddenly jumped forward, shouting with a smirk, "Too slow! Even your gathering of inner energy is slow." Chung Dobo's eyes widened at the unexpected attack. Mujin then performed another technique, Solitary 9 Swords, second form, breaking form. As Mujin struck, Chung Dobo tried to block with his sword, but his blade was instantly flung back with a loud clang. Mujin immediately swung his sword again. Chung Dobo barely blocked the attack, clenching his teeth with a furious expression as he thought to himself that he was so helpless against these attacks. He questioned whether he was truly losing to this energy core-less bastard. As they clashed swords once more, Chung Dobo's blade began to crack. Moments later, his sword broke in half. In an instant, Mujin swung his sword and cut down Chung Dobo's arm. Chung Dobo's eyes widened in shock as he muttered, "What the?" Before he could finish his thought, Mujin lifted his leg and delivered a powerful kick to Chung Dobo's gut. The force violently threw Chung Dobo backward as he screamed in pain. He dropped to the ground and continued sliding until he stopped just at the edge of the stage. After his body came to rest, his severed hand also dropped to the ground. From the top viewing area, his mother Bu Choyan screamed loudly, calling out his name. On the other side, Elder Do and Masak began breathing heavily, shocked at the sight. On the stage, Mujin turned around and walked toward the severed hand. The crowd started chattering, questioning if young Master Hua had truly won. Mujin picked up the severed hand, lifted it up, and pointed it toward Bu Choyan. He shouted that he would take this arm as payment for the 17 years of grudge. Bu Choyan responded with a shaky voice and grief-stricken expression, asking what he had said. Mujin replied that since it was the Changhua Merchant Guild, perhaps they would find a way to reattach the arm. Suddenly, someone jumped down from the top viewing area. It was Han Yigang, who landed beside Chung Dobo's fallen body. He immediately placed his hand on Dobo's body to examine him. After a few moments, Bu Choyan also hurriedly rushed toward Dobo on the stage. Han Yigang spoke after checking Dobo's condition, stating that his dantian had been shattered. He stood up and looked at Mujin, asking if it had really been necessary to go this far. Mujin scoffed in response, questioning what Han Yigang meant. Han Yigang explained that there had been a clear gap in skill, and the match had been over long ago. Mujin replied that if they were going to speak like that, he had plenty to say too. He glared toward Bu Choyan and spoke about whether it had been necessary to use the 7 wounds fist strike on the head of a 5-year-old child who knew no martial arts. He declared this was nothing more than settling a grudge from 17 years ago, for daring to provoke the Yonhua clan. They would now have to pay the price and should be prepared. After his statement, Mujin began to walk away. Bu Choyan instantly fell to her knees, clenching her fist as she cried out loudly. As she wept, she thought to herself that she would never forget this matter involving Hua Mujin. The crowd remained stunned in awe at the result of the fight. As Mujin walked away, they began to roar loudly in cheers, chattering excitedly amongst themselves about how he had crushed an outer sect disciple of the Kongdong sect in just a few moves. They remarked on the sword art they had never seen before, declaring that a new martial master had been born. As Mujin stepped off the stage, Elder Do and Masak hurriedly rushed toward him, calling his name. Mujin continued walking and simply instructed them to head back. Elder Do, still unable to believe the result, responded with a hesitant affirmation. As he watched Mujin walk away, he thought to himself that young Master Hua's back had never seemed so broad before. His thoughts were interrupted when Mujin turned his head back toward him and called out, "Chief Steward Do." When Elder Do responded, Mujin continued, "About that." Elder Do, confused, stammered a question about what that referred to. He worried to himself that perhaps Mujin had already noticed their plan to run away. Mujin cleared his throat with a smirk and spoke about the gold he had entrusted to Elder Do, asking if he had already spent it all. Elder Do laughed nervously, assuring him that of course not, there was still a little left. Mujin walked away and mentioned that he would have to stop by the loan syndicate again soon because of money issues. He added that these days, the meat was rather tough. He paused for a moment and continued, one more thing. About Elder Joe and the other warriors. I do not particularly care if they choose to leave the clan, but if they ever try to split me apart from my 2 younger siblings." He turned his head toward Elder Do and glared at him with full killing intent. "They will have to wager their lives." Later that day, elsewhere, Elder Joe sat on a rock holding a piece of paper while Hua Soyan climbed on him, shouting angrily about how this could happen on the very day of her brother's duel. Hua Dojin, standing to the side, expressed his disappointment, stating that this time, he could not forgive Elder Joe. Elder Joe struggled with the children, explaining that he needed to read the message that had come with the messenger pigeon. After a few moments of reading the letter, he muttered, "Oh dear. We are screwed." The letter stated that young Master Hua had won the duel, their escape plan had been discovered, and they should return immediately. As they prepared to depart, Mujin paused and turned to Elder Do. He mentioned that since they were discussing finances, it was time for what he called a debt party. Elder Do appeared confused by the term, prompting Mujin to clarify that he meant dealing with the loan syndicate, also known as the Bangho sect. Mujin stated firmly that it was time he addressed them and assured Elder Do he would handle everything personally, suggesting the elder could rest instead. Elder Do responded nervously, his thoughts betraying his concern. Though the martial arts duel had proven the young master was completely different from before, he still worried deeply. Mujin dismissed his anxiety, calling him an overprotective old man. Elder Do insisted that whatever Mujin did, he must avoid entanglement with the social sect. Mujin waved off the warning impatiently, repeating that he understood. After Elder Do departed, Masak questioned whether Mujin truly intended to confront the Jianghu sect directly. Mujin crossed his arms, replying that troublesome matters were best addressed immediately. He then turned to Masak and instructed him to stay close behind his big boss from now on. Masak immediately affirmed his understanding, though he seemed puzzled by the new title. Later at the Jianghu sect usury business, Ma Jungbo greeted Mujin with visible apprehension upon their arrival. To himself, he reflected that he never expected to see Mujin again in this lifetime, especially after witnessing how he had crippled the vicious second son of the Jianghu merchant group. When Mujin announced he had come to repay his debts, Ma Jungbo fell silent. Mujin walked past him, commenting on the quiet atmosphere and asking if their business had failed. Ma Jungbo gritted his teeth before explaining that most gamblers in Xicheng had attended Mujin's duel, leaving their establishment empty. Mujin remarked knowingly that everyone must have placed bets on his match. Instantly, Ma Jungbo and nearby Jianghu sect members bowed deeply, apologizing profusely for any disrespect. Mujin suggested they had likely set favorable odds on his side and made a considerable profit from it. Still bowing, Ma Jungbo reluctantly confirmed this was true. Mujin pressed further, noting they had made good money thanks to him and questioning whether they planned to remain silent about sharing their profits. As Ma Jungbo lifted his head, he thought bitterly that Mujin was trying to squeeze them again. He quickly assured Mujin they had intended to properly express their gratitude. Satisfied, Mujin entered a nearby room and sat in a chair, stating this was exactly what he liked to hear. Ma Jungbo watched him from behind, noting silently how completely different Mujin was from before. The air around him was cold yet steady, truly the aura of a martial master filled with killing intent. Mujin then inquired about the Jianghu sect leader's whereabouts. Ma Jungbo hesitated before asking why Mujin sought him. Mujin placed his hand on the table and stood abruptly, warning that he disliked repeating himself. Before he could finish his threat, the Jianghu sect leader, Che Wengjiol, entered the room accompanied by another man. Mujin smirked at their appearance, particularly mocking Che Wengjiol's hairstyle and asking if he was indeed the boss. Che Wengjiol replied that his subordinates had informed him about Mujin. Mujin questioned why they made things difficult for someone merely seeking conversation, adding that Che certainly did not possess a pretty face. He then pointed at the man behind Che, asking if he was one of his lackeys. The man stepped forward, his chi visibly surrounding him thickly and consistently. He smirked and commented that Mujin had quite the mouth for a child. This man was Dongsal Hyukjo of the social sect. He continued by asking if Mujin was the one eyeing his money. As Dongsal approached, Mujin reached into his pocket while thinking to himself that this man was from the social sect. He then bluntly told Dongsal that adults were talking and questioned if he had a death wish. Dongsal chuckled before suddenly lunging toward Mujin, shouting for him to try killing him. From behind, Masak called out in alarm to the young master. Mujin pulled a chopstick from his pocket, spun it around his hand, and declared that regardless of sect affiliation, anyone standing in his way would get a hole put through them. He threw the chopstick with precision. Dongsal managed to block the attack with his bare left hand, but the chopstick pierced through his palm. Staggering back, Dongsal realized to his surprise that Mujin was no ordinary young man. Flexing his right hand, he commented that having his hand pierced by chopsticks was interesting, calling Mujin an intriguing little bastard. Mujin retorted that he felt nothing hearing such words from a wrinkled old man. Dongsal lunged forward again, shouting not to get cocky. Mujin likewise surged forward, but in an instant, he disappeared from sight. Reappearing above Dongsal while still mid-air, Mujin questioned where Dongsal thought he was looking. Dongsal quickly turned to attack with his bare hands, but Mujin dodged effortlessly. Seeing Mujin grin down at him, Dongsal clenched his jaw in disbelief that a mere youth could evade his attacks so easily. Mujin then spoke in a chilling tone, suggesting they open one more hole. Before Dongsal could react, Mujin's hand was already aimed at his right eye with the chopstick. In one motion, he stabbed Dongsal's eye. Both Masak and Ma Jungbo froze in shock at the sight. Mujin stood before the kneeling Dongsal, who groaned in pain while clutching his bloody eye socket. Mujin grinned and asked if the air was flowing nicely through the new opening. Dongsal screamed curses, warning that Mujin had attacked the social sect and they would come for him, threatening his family and subordinates as well. Before he could finish, Mujin kicked his face, driving the embedded chopstick deeper. Looking down at him, Mujin challenged the social sect to come if they dared, adding that in the meantime, Dongsal would die there. Dongsal suddenly screamed in desperation, begging for his life. He offered everything he owned, his wealth, his concubines, anything to spare him. Mujin questioned his sudden desire to live. He placed his foot down and withdrew the chopstick from Dongsal's eye, stating he had no need for concubines but found the mentioned wealth interesting. Dongsal screamed that all his wealth was in Dichang and he would bring everything back immediately. Mujin approved of this attitude but warned sinisterly that if Dongsal failed to return, he would be breathing through the holes in his face instead. Dongsal staggered back, shouting he would return right away before fleeing the premises. With the room now silent, Mujin turned his chilling gaze toward Che Wengjiol. He suggested they continue settling the debt. Che Wengjiol's body trembled before Mujin, and instantly, he bowed deeply, pressing his forehead to the ground while begging for mercy. Mujin approached him, questioning if he too wished to plead. Che Wengjiol screamed promises to give everything he owned. Mujin looked down at him while holding another chopstick, stating coldly that Che was speaking nonsense. His property already belonged to Mujin. Che Wengjiol responded with a shaky voice, confused about what Mujin meant. Mujin explained that the 7,000 gold nyang in profits Che had extracted from commoners, plus the price of all the lives he had ruined by manipulating martial clans, would equal all his assets. Che Wengjiol paused, looking up at Mujin before beginning to offer everything, including. Before he could finish, Mujin threw the chopstick directly into Che Wengjiol's forehead, instantly killing him. Mujin remarked coldly that Che clearly did not understand plain speech, questioning why he kept offering what was already his. As Che Wengjiol's body fell to the ground, Ma Zhengbo and other Bangho sect members froze in shocked horror, their eyes wide and mouths agape. When Mujin turned toward them, he demanded to know who was next in command. Without hesitation, Ma Zhengbo stepped forward, nervously identifying himself as the vice-sect leader. Mujin expressed mild surprise at this revelation. Ma Zhengbo bowed deeply, begging for his life and swearing he would live honestly if given another chance. Mujin sat back down in a chair and granted his request. He then inquired about the dead leader's property value. Ma Zhengbo placed a paper on the table, reporting that Che's house, brothel, and cash combined totaled approximately 4,000 gold nyang. When asked about the Bangho sect's total assets, he replied that counting all establishments, it amounted to at least 10,000 gold nyang, including the 500 gold nyang tribute paid to the social sect. Mujin studied the paper thoughtfully before calculating aloud, the leader's personal wealth of 4,000 gold nyang, the businesses that should naturally return to his influence, the sect's total assets of 10,000 gold nyang, the 500 gold nyang tribute to social, plus compensation for the mental distress they had caused, totaling about 20,000 gold nyang. Ma Zhengbo muttered in disbelief about emotional damages, but Mujin insisted this sounded fair. Without hesitation, Ma Zhengbo promised to prepare the transfer documents immediately. Mujin instructed him to handle all documents in gold right there in the room. As Ma Zhengbo affirmed his compliance, the room fell silent again before Mujin's tone shifted firmly and chillingly. He looked at the remaining Bangho sect members and suggested they negotiate ransom prices for the rest of them, clarifying that while he had spared Ma Zhengbo, he had never promised to spare the others. Instantly, the remaining members began pleading for their lives. Later, at the Manhwa clan estate, Elder Do stood utterly shocked as he stared up at a mountain of wooden crates filled with gold. He exclaimed in disbelief, asking what all this was. Mujin, standing behind him, explained he had just returned from the debt party, noting each chest contained approximately 400 gold nyang. After glancing at the crates, Elder Do immediately turned to Mujin, addressing him formally. He reminded Mujin that he had previously warned who backed the Bangho sect. When Mujin recalled it was the social sect, Elder Do urgently asked if he knew who was allied with them. Mujin responded dismissively that he did not care to know. Elder Do shouted that Ju Sugang of the Crimson Sword sect was sworn brothers with Dong Sal Hyukjo and Hong Johong of the social sect. When Mujin recognized the name Dong Sal Hyukjo as the man with pitch-black fingers, Elder Do was horrified to learn Mujin had already encountered him. Mujin flatly confirmed he had stuck chopsticks in the man's eyeballs. Elder Do could only manage a stunned as, "What?" Mujin's tone turned serious as he addressed Elder Do. He explained that opponents like that might be too much for Elder Do or Elder Joe to handle, but they should not hold him to their standards. If trouble like that came looking for him, he would simply kill them all. Changing the subject, he instructed Elder Do to prepare tender beef for dinner and ensure his siblings were fed when they returned. He then headed inside. Elder Do remained stunned by Mujin's actions, watching him walk away while thinking to himself that Dong Sal Hyukjo was feared even across Sichuan, yet Mujin did not seem to think much of such a man. Recalling the incident during the duel as well, Elder Do wondered if this was truly the same young Master Hua he had once known. As night fell, in a room at the Jianghu Merchant Guild, a mysterious figure spoke to Bu Choyan, noting that planning an ambush on the Manhwa clan must mean she had been rattled by the duel's outcome. Bu Choyan, facing away from the figures, coldly reminded them they were merely hired help and questioned why they were so talkative. She reiterated her instructions, bring back only one child alive, kill the rest if desired, but that specific child must not die. One of the mysterious figures chuckled darkly, assuring her they would return before sunrise. After they departed, Bu Choyan thought to herself about Hua Mujin. She vowed silently that she would tear apart everything he held dear right before his eyes.